Good morning. Good morning. Let's turn our soundboard on. I woke up late. Can you tell? I never sleep in. I usually wake up, I don't know, 6:30, 6ish sometimes. Um, but this morning I slept in and it was nice. And so I'm not going to apologize for it because it was amazing. And I think as women, we apologize too much. You get my ears in. I hope you had a good rest. If you're here, pop a comment in the chat. Of course, if you're not here, you couldn't do that. So that goes without saying, doesn't it? Ow, got that little hair in my ear. Anyway, so I got up, I got a shower, just piled my hair on top of my head, and here I am. And only 1 minute late at that. So I'm calling that a win for the day. Those crazy. You always got those curls. I don't know if you've got naturally curly hair, but you've always like what is going on there? You've always got those curls that just don't want to cooperate. Generally, the way you handle that is by getting up in enough time to get ready. I feel like if you guys don't watch Jeff A. Hearn, I know I mentioned him a lot. Good morning, Kay. If you don't watch him, let's see. No, that was super cute. Like 10 minutes ago. I don't know what's happening now. We'll just push it back. If you don't watch Jeff A. Hearn, see, I'm going to mess with my hair now. It's not vanity. I just don't want to look like a freak. Okay, so it's a little bit of vanity. Don't judge me. I'll just pretend that's like laying really nice. If you're here, leave a comment. Oh my goodness. Let me make sure we're working on. All right, what's going on? There we go. We're good. I got my little kimonos on. Ladies, if you are self-conscious about your bat wings, as we get older, um, where I've lost a lot of weight, where you get, it's going to drive me crazy. Where you get older, there we go. When you get older, you get this kind of hanging bat wing, that you can wave to people with. And I'm really, really self conscious about it. I'm not one that's like, good morning from Norway or good afternoon. But I'm really self conscious about it. And so I thought, I don't want to have to wear long sleeves all summer. And if you've got kind of that, gentlemen, if you're here, I'm sorry. These are just lady problems that need to be discussed. Anyway, if you've got like that extra skin or you've lost a bunch of weight, the sleeves on things can be really tight. And so what I recommend to you are kimonos. They're really sheer. I can get you. See how you can kind of see through that? They're really sheer. You can just wear them over a tank top. And then you don't have to worry about your upper arm flab. Isn't that brilliant? Jacksonville, Florida, honey, you are not late. You are right on time because I was late. Good morning, everyone. It's 7:30 your time. Where are you at, Liz? Okay, I first had to show you. I don't normally do current events on this part of the show or on this morning show, but I have to show you guys this. Sometimes it's just so ridiculous. You have to do it. Oh no, I want my mail. Doggone it. Hold on. I sent it to me. And there it is. Okay, so let me pull this up for you guys. What on earth is going on? Okay, how do I do this without displaying my entire email? It'd be cool if you could pop out that email window. I'm sure there's a way, but I just don't know how to do it, which wouldn't shock anyone at this point. All right. No, got to go this way. Give me just a second. That's weird. What is this? This is expand message cards. I don't know what that means. That word you keep using. I don't know. I don't think it means what you think it means. So I'm just going to read these to you because they were just absolutely hysterical. So supposedly, a U-Haul truck, let me find the original tweet. Breaking, Nazi flag found inside U-Haul truck, which rammed into security gates outside White House in Washington, D.C. So you just see this huge U-Haul truck just kind of ramming the gate, right? So, and the only thing in it was a Nazi flag, and I'm guessing a person. And so I posted, yeah, all those crazies who rent large trucks to haul their Nazi flags around. What was he planning to do? Swaddle President Brandon in it? And then somebody posted, the poor fence did not see it coming. Nazi, which is great pre-coffee humor for me. Then Dr. Gain of Function says, awaiting U-Haul manifesto. And then I say, U-Hauls have long been the racist, white supremacist, transphobic, anti-vax vehicles of choice. We're issued one along with a Nazi flag and a Chick-fil-A gift card when we become conservatives. Then Clandestine posts or tweets, you're telling me someone drove a U-Haul with nothing but a Nazi flag in it, tried to ram it into the White House, got stuck on a curb, then the police spread out the flag on the pavement so the media could get a shot. The left needed a narrative change. I guess they got it. I reply, right? Why not downsize to the 10-foot truck for a load that small? So frivolous. So I message all this to my husband because, he's the funniest guy I know. Let me pull that up. Oh boy. Okay. Let me slide down here. I'd show it to you, but my whole email is open and I don't want to do that. Not that I don't trust you guys, but I don't know who comes around after you guys, who's sneaking around after the broadcast. Those are the people we got to watch out for. So I sent him this thing. I sent him all the links or all the pictures, screenshots. And he says, who knows what they'll pull between now and election day? I said, yes, but what a lame one. The comments are hysterical. Mine are top notch. See, and I'm humble too. He said, my husband says, of course, stop it. My husband says, of course they are. You have the gift of a fertile, intelligent, and twisted mind. This, you've got to love when your husband gets you. I said, it's true. It's one of the things I'm most proud of. So that's the end of that. But if you didn't catch that news this morning, it was pretty funny. Did you finish your thought about Jeff Hearn? Thank you. So Jeff A. Hearn is a lot like me in that he finds his stuff funny and he laughs at it. This is why I would be a terrible comedian, because I would get up there and I would just crack up. And Jeff A. Hearn, if you watch Jeff A. Hearn, and it's Jeff A. The A. Hearn is all one word. So Jeff Ahearn. He'll say something and he's like me. He just cracks up. And so I get him and I watch his show. And it's like, it's funny. It's almost like watching parrots. Because he'll say something and he'll do his little laugh and then I'll do my little laugh because I think his little laugh is funny. It's great. I'm going to get together with him and do a show soon. Good morning. Oh, Sarana from Romania. You look just beautiful. Love the colors also. Oh, thank you. I don't normally wear greens, but I'm trying to expand my color palette, expand myself as a person. Either that or I'm just completely full of crap. Either is entirely possible. But yeah, it's my thrown together, to heck with the bangs, put your hair up, grab some OJ and get your butt down to the camper because it's time to do book club. Good morning, Lisa. I hope you're having a good day. My day started out, you know how you'll like get started late and then you're kind of rushed and then the rest of the day just has that stain on it. Oh, it is very spring, isn't it? Amazon, you guys. I'm not one of those people. If I'm late, like I won't lie to people about why. People say, oh, I had car trouble. And I'm like, no, I slept in. It was amazing. It's all I thought it could be. I did wake up in a bit of a panic because I was like, oh crap, I've only got an hour to get everything together. But yeah, if I'm late, I'll tell you I'm late because I'm an idiot or because I'm sleeping in or whatever. And I sleep in so rarely. It was just all I thought it could be. And of course, Steve Martin, our cat, is, trying to get me out of bed. And Bonnie Gooch, the outside cat, who is not ours, but we feed her. Bonnie Gooch is yelling up to the bedroom window. Hey, it's 9:00, woman. What are you doing? I need my food. Don't make me come up there. So I had to get up and feed the cats. Of course, if it weren't for them, I'd probably still be sleeping. Wouldn't that be terrible to completely sleep through the podcast? I almost did that recently when I took a nap. I dared take a nap before my night show. And then I woke up and was like, oh my, then I was panicked because the night show is a lot more prep. This I'm just reading. But generally, I have all my stuff done ahead of time. I hope you guys are doing well. There's just so much crazy going on in the news. I can't wait till Friday's show because there's going to be so much to talk about. Steve does not play the banjo, but he does have a better sense of rhythm than Steve Martin does. We were going to make his middle name Steve Navin Martin, but we didn't. And then we have Abby, who is Abby the Tabby. She has a middle name, and it's the. And then we have Sophia Loren. And that is my ridiculous cat lady life. But I have a husband, so I don't know if I technically count as a cat lady. I'm not sure how that works. You guys will have to let me know on that. Rabbi Jim, good morning. Jacksonville, Florida. Jacksonville, Florida. All right, guys. So if you're new to book club, don't sweat it. I read to you. So if you don't have the book, don't sweat that either. I would encourage you to get it, though, because Johnathan Cahn worked really hard to write it. And I think we ought to support his ministry, especially if you enjoy the book. We're starting on chapter 27 today. Don't fret if you're one of those people that's like, oh my gosh, I have to turn it off because I haven't seen or haven't heard everything up until now. Don't do that because the chapters very much stand alone nicely, I think. So there you go. And you can always go back and rewatch. So we're starting on chapter 27, and this is part 7, The Transformer. You guys, I'm still not ready. I got to get settled down. I went to the eye doctor, and so I had gone to Vision Works in Richmond, Kentucky last year, and I have not been able to see since. I went in 3 different times. The guy kept trying to get it right, and it was just not even, I just gave up. I'm like, I'll just have to not see well until next year. And so I finally went in and I saw my husband's eye doctor. This guy is a genius. And he likes to teach. He's like me, he likes to educate on every little thing. And so I found him fascinating. I can barely hear. Oh, that's better. I found him fascinating. And, he was just teaching me all about the eye. And we were talking about COVID and politics and all that. I didn't know where he stood on anything, but he was really, really interesting. His sister is 74 and her name is Penny. And for her 74th birthday, she went skydiving. I need to do that just as a way to overcome my fear of heights. I'm seriously considering it. I've thought about ziplining. I can't decide which is more terrifying. So I'm working on that. But anyway, why am I telling you that? The eye doctor. Oh, so he got me in a contact where I can see distance and mid-range with this eye, and I can kind of see mid-range and close up with this eye. And look, I don't have to wear any glasses. It's awesome. If something's really small, I do. But as it stands, no. Scott Lawler, good morning. Says, I'm tuned in. I was working on some new music. Skydiving is fantastic. I haven't been ziplining. Well, Scott, what kind of music do you play, buddy? My husband is a musician. And if you don't join us on Friday night, you're missing out. I've been adding a new feature where we call Don, about an hour or so into the show because he gets up real early on Friday morning, so he's tired. But I call him with some very inappropriate topic. And then we have a little conversation and people ask him questions, and that's the extent of his appearance. I'm trying to get it worked out where he could sit second chair for an hour. We need another camera and stuff. But he's just so funny, and we play very well off each other. It works out well. I married well. He married better, but no, I'm just kidding. So Scott, I'll peek back up here in a minute to see what kind of music you play and what you're working on, and what instrument you play, or maybe you do like electric. How does that work? Like computer music? What is that called? I don't know. Digital. A lot of people put stuff together like that. My wife calls it music for horror. So not something to fall asleep by. Gotcha. So Scott's working on ambient music, aka music for horror films. That's great, because I'm very visual, and so I could picture what's going on in the horror movie as I'm listening to the music. It's one of my gifts, aside from sarcastic remarks and reading. Oh, we're not getting far today, are we? I'm just silly. Okay, chapter 27, The Transformer. There was another side to the Ishtar, another nature, another power, and another agenda. And it would be from this, her other side, that the transformation of American and world culture would be taken to a new stage and a new level. And from this, new movements would spring forth that would alter the face of Western civilization beyond recognition. We will now remove a veil to uncover an ancient mystery that lies behind the forces, movements, events, and phenomena that are at the moment touching and transforming virtually every facet of modern culture. And yet the mystery goes back thousands of years to the clay tables of ancient Sumer. Sumer? I don't know. Something about Ishtar. Ishtar was a sorceress. She was known for her powers to alter people's affections, passions, thoughts, and at times their essence. We are now about to see how, as a sorceress, she would alter more than human relationships and institutions in the modern world, something even deeper. If the sexual revolution was the first of her renewed works, this would be her second. The second, though connected to the first, would open up a different realm. It would alter human desire, human identity, and human nature itself. The transformation would follow after the goddess' own nature. These there was something different about Ishtar. I am a woman, I am a man. Actually, I think I do need my readers for this. But at least I can see the screen. Oh, that's better. In her link to the planet Venus, she was known as the morning star, but also the evening star. In this was a clue into her nature, duality. She would inhabit two ends and polar opposites of the spectrum. She was on one hand the goddess of love, beauty, allurement, and female sexuality, but on the other, she embodied and personified ferocity, aggressiveness, violence, battle, war, and destruction. Characteristics and elements typically associated with masculinity. On one hand, she was shown as a naked woman in jewels, the goddess of sexuality, but on the other, an armored fighter, a symbol of war. She was in one entity, the embodiment of male and female. Ishtar's connection to both femininity and masculinity was more than illusion or metaphor. An ancient Mesopotamian tablet records the goddess saying these words: "When I sit in the alehouse, I am a woman, and I am an exuberant young man." Another ancient writing records her saying this: "Though I am a woman, I am a noble young man." The core and operative words in such statements are these: I am a woman, I am a man. To turn a man into a woman. The joining of the masculine and feminine in one being was, in many ways, what Ishtar was all about. It was her nature to cross lines, transgress boundaries, break conventions, blur distinctions, and merge opposites to confuse and invert. It was not her nature to accept reality as it was her nature to bend it, transform it, conform it to her will and desire. If her will was to be a woman, she would be a woman, but if it was to be a man, she would become a man. She was the goddess of transmutation and metamorphosis. Her nature was to alter nature, and most specifically the nature of male and female, man and woman. An ancient Sumerian hymn reveals her power. It was to turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man, to change one into the other. She had the ability to turn male into female and female into male, to blur and bend and merge and invert the two. The transformer returns. So what would happen if the goddess and that power came into the modern world? What would happen is what has already happened and is now happening. It would mean that there would be another transformation, a deeper and further work. And because of that, we would not expect it to dramatically manifest at the beginning of the sexual revolution, but later on. Really? Crows are like the drunk, cackling aunts and uncles of the bird community. Like, what's he yelling about? There's nothing going on out there. It does explain a lot about our current culture. I need to go get my caffeine to keep up with your energy. Scott says, oh, I got Scott's. Okay. Jeez, what happened there? Okay, there we go. It would be another transportation. Okay, and so it would. It would take the sexual revolution to a deeper stage, to its logical conclusions, and to another realm. It would appear as something new, a new movement, a new dynamic to penetrate and transform American and Western culture. But behind it all was an ancient principality that was said to possess the power to transform human nature and reality. The Transformer's blueprint. Upon its return to the world, the ancient spirit would set out to accomplish its mission. It would seek to alter the definition of male and female. It would move to blur the lines and nullify the distinctions between the two. It would act to transform the nature of man and woman. It would seek to feminize all that was male and masculinize all that was female. It would attempt to turn man into woman and woman into man. It would war against the sanctity of sexuality and gender by confusing the two and merging the one into the other and the other into the one, and by doing so, seek to nullify them. It would appear first at the fringes of society where Ishtar was known to have dwelled, but then it would come into the mainstream and begin permeating every part of culture, leaving almost no facet of life untouched. It would usher in the next stage of Americans' paganization, and it would become the chief hammerhead to smash the biblical foundations of Western civilization. We will now open up the goddess's deeper work and her darker magic. We will see how she cast her spell and altered a civilization and human nature. It would begin with the spell she cast and the transformation she set in motion concerning her own kind, the metamorphosis of women. Welcome, Michael. You have a note. I don't care. You're still getting a demerit. An hour of study hall for you. Rise of the warrior woman. But not only was Ishtar combative, she was a warrior. The Sumerian poem Inanna and Abi described the goddess in her ferocity as she enters into battle. Goddess of the fearsome divine powers, clad in terror, riding on the great divine powers, Inanna, Ishtar, drenched in blood, rushing around in great battles, you destroy mighty lands with arrow and strength, and overpower lands. Thus, as the spirit of Ishtar began taking hold of American and Western culture, women now began taking on the identities of roles of fighters and warriors. The spirit of the military goddess was manifest in the militarization of women. It was what had been written in ancient times of the goddess's powers and acts. As it is inscribed on the ancient tablets, she was at work to put spindles into the hands of men and to give weapons to the women. So the warrior women became part of popular culture and entertainment where physical combat had once been the domain of men. Women were now increasingly depicted in fiction as bearing supernatural powers to war and wreak destruction. It was all in keeping with the mythology of the ancient warrior goddess. I wanted to tell you guys, I saw this thing this week, and it was a guy that was talking about the masculine and feminine roles. I wish I'd saved it. But he was talking about how man is the protector, not because necessarily woman is weaker, which she is physically. Yes, there are exceptions. It's because the man understands the sacredness of the woman and how important her role is, and that life comes through her. So it is his, what is that called? It is like his chivalrous duty to protect her, because by protecting her, you're protecting life. And I just thought that was a really beautiful way to say that. It really struck me. The militarized goddess. Ishtar entered into the battlefield fully armored and weaponed. It was in her nature, skill, and power to wage war. She was a militarized goddess. So upon her return, not only would she revive the image, fantasy, and narrative of the warrior goddess, she would bring about the militarization of women. In other words, the warrior woman would manifest as well in real life. It was a phenomenon that was largely unprecedented for most of human history, the entering of women into military combat. The precedent, though, could be found in mythology. The goddesses' myths were now becoming reality. It was another manifestation of women being conformed into the goddess's image. And it was also another step in the divorcing of man and woman, male and female. The more women could resemble men or replicate their functions, the less they would need them. Women were now to be their own protectors and defenders. And so this too would feed into the goddess's destruction of marriage. The bond that held man and woman together was progressively deteriorating. Whom Ishtar deprived. It was no accident that marriage and family was being continually devalued, the workplace continually glorified, and sexual promiscuity or any sexuality devoid of marriage continually celebrated. Having been indoctrinated into the cult of self and self-fulfillment, both men and women were now more reluctant to enter into marriage and less able to maintain it. Both women and men were now more likely to end up alone. So an ancient Mesopotamian text speaks of the women, whom Ishtar deprived of husbands. Ishtar had promised the liberation of women, and yet studies into the state of women's well-being reveal that since the beginning of the transformation, they had instead grown progressively unhappier. They were now less likely to be married, more likely to be in the workforce, less likely to be fulfilled, and more likely to be alone. And yet, even in this, they had been unwittingly conformed to the image of the goddess. Hold on, my screens are going crazy here. The goddess would not stop with women. If she was going to transform cultures, nations, and civilizations, she would have to transform men as well. We now move to her other spell, and the other transformation she began, the metamorphosis of men. Yeah, I agree, Nadine. It really, really struck me. So they've made it like an insult that a woman would need a man's protection. And it's not an insult. It is the nature of our sacred place in the world, that yikes, that we are the life bringers, and therefore we must be protected, lest the whole depopulation thing come to pass. And it's gotten to the point now where we don't even have to worry about other people destroying our life-giving abilities. Women will just do it themselves. It's a very sad state that we're in. Chapter 29, The Metamorphosis of Men. As she had done with women, Ishtar would inaugurate the metamorphosis and deconstruction of men. The emasculator. The goddess was never at ease with masculinity, if it was not her own, if it belonged to a man. Her lovers were dominated by her and tended to suffer a tragic fate. With regard to men, Ishtar was dangerous and deadly. She was their emasculator. A Hittite hymn to the goddess describes her as the one who will grind away from men manliness. Thus it was Ishtar's nature to remove manhood from men, to grind it away from them. In the original language, that which the goddess rested? I think that's supposed to be wrestled. From men was their zikratu. The word refers to potency, masculinity, and heroic power. It was all part of her merging and confusing of gender. If one can remove masculinity from men, one can destroy the distinction between male and female. Then one can destroy marriage, the family, and then society. It was Ishtar's power and desire to turn not only a woman into a man, but a man into a woman. The feminization of men. So if the goddess's spirit was to begin permeating Western civilization, we would expect that that civilization to begin warring against the masculinity of men. And that's exactly what happened. Male attributes as exhibited by men were increasingly attacked and deemed to be toxic masculinity. Men had to be demasculinized. An ancient prayer speaks of her power to emasculate men, to remove their ability to fight and protect. She would take away their swords, bows, arrows, daggers, then put into their hand the distaff and the mirror. With women increasingly taking on the roles of men, with marriage continuing to weaken, with more marriages ending in divorce and others never starting, men were increasingly separated from their traditional roles and functions of provider and protector. So, as the roles and nature of women were being altered, so too were those of men. She took away their swords and gave them the distaff and the mirror. So the spirit of the goddess would first seek to emasculate men and then feminize them. And so, as women were now instructed to show strength, men were now instructed to show weakness. It was the goddess's ancient magic. Old authorities and new gods. For the transformation to be complete, the war against male leadership and authority could not be confined to any particular segment of society. It would have to pervade the entire culture. They would start mowing now. And so a spirit took hold of American and Western culture, a spirit that relentlessly attacked any association of men with leadership, whether in public life, popular culture, or the home. Men were increasingly portrayed as being unable or unfit to lead, as either toxic oppressors or bumbling, overgrown children. America went from the ethos of father knows best to the depiction of fathers who knew almost nothing and served only as objects of the jokes and mockery. The goddess was doing just as she had done in ancient times, challenging male leadership and demasculinizing men. As to Ishtar's corrosive effect on men, one scholar noted that it was her power and nature to destroy masculinity, effectively a destruction of the cultural order. If she could destroy masculinity, if she could delegitimize the authority of the father and of men in general, she could transform society. If the old leadership was nullified, then a culture could be led onto a different path. And if the old authority could be mocked and neutralized, the new authorities could take over, in this case, new gods. The reprogramming of boys. And just as in the metamorphosis of women, the metamorphosis of men had to begin in childhood. While girls were told to be strong, boys were not. If boys displayed typical male characteristics, they would likely be reproved. They were less and less encouraged to succeed, and they began falling further and further behind in their education. Thus, their likelihood of assuming positions of leadership in future days was deteriorating. As for the natural male disposition to fight and protect, the impulse was now being channeled into video games. A generation of boys was now growing up addicted to computer screens. Their inclination to protect was thus being channeled away from marriage and family and into the universe of virtual reality. As for sexuality, their desires were likewise now increasingly channeled away from reality and into the world of online pornography. The goddess was making sure from early on that the glue that had held together man and woman, marriage and family, society and civilization would be washed away. Sword of Ishtar. Is the lawnmower getting super loud for you guys? Because I can close this window. List says Ishtar's lofty argument for blurring the lines between what is man or what is woman are so empty in very much the same way it's happening. Yeah, that's what he's doing. He's drawing this parallel of the gods returning and pulling all of this again, but in much, more dramatic form. Chapter 30. Let me know if the mower gets loud, guys, and I'll turn it down. Or I'll close that window. The androgynous. Having ushered in the metamorphosis of gender, the goddess would now take it to the next stage and level. The Asinu Kurgaru, Kalu, and Gala. You can't hear it, okay. It is one thing to demasculinize the one and defeminize the other, but it is another to superimpose the one onto the other or to merge the two. Okay, good. But this was her power. It could be seen in her worship and priesthood, her priests and ministers, her temple singers, and her ritual performers, the Asinu, the Kurgaru, the Kalu, and the Gala, were known for publicly bending and breaking the parameters and definitions of gender. They were men who had taken on the appearances and attributes of women. As Ishtar had masculinized herself, her male priests had feminized themselves or had been feminized. They made themselves appear as women. They dressed in women's garments, they made up their faces. Today they would be called cross-dressers, transvestites, non-binary, bigender, or androgynous. The return of the androgynous god. So the cult of Ishtar overflowed, not only with sexuality and promiscuity, but androgyny. Ishtar herself, a female with male attributes, was an embodiment of androgyny. So too were her priests, as males with female attributes. Our writer observed of the goddess. Okay, I've got to close it. It's going to drive me crazy. Where is he? I don't know if it's behind us or. I'll be right back. Get a drink or pee really quick. Well, I don't know how much that helped, but. All right, gonna get around that mic. It's still loud. It's okay. All right, I hope you're done peeing. Pee faster. Wash your hands. All right, let's get situated here. The return of the androgynous god. So the cult of Ishtar overflowed, not only with sexuality and promiscuity, but androgyny. Ishtar herself, a female with male attributes, was an embodiment of androgyny. So too were her priests as males with female attributes. Our writer observed of the goddess. Her androgyny is attested to in her cultic personnel, which include eunuchs and transvestites, and during her festivals, young men carried hoops, a feminine symbol, while young women carried swords. So what would happen if the spirit of Ishtar took possession of America and Western culture? We would expect to see the merging of male and female, the confusing of the two, the feminization of males, and the masculinization of females. And this too is exactly what happened. A strange thing accompanied the phenomenon. To speak of a man as being particularly masculine or manly, or as especially possessing male traits, was now increasingly looked upon with disdain. Similarly, to speak of a woman as being especially feminine or wifely fell into disfavor. If possessed by a male, maleness became a negative attribute. If possessed by a female, femininity became an attribute of little value and retrograde. On the other hand, if male traits were possessed by a woman, they were now to be celebrated and admired, and female traits, if possessed by a man, were now to be applauded as a virtue. What could account for such a strange inversion of nature and reality? It was all in keeping with the spirit of the goddess, who specialized in the masculinization of women and feminization of men. The problem of biology. Female icons of popular music and youth culture, unlike those of early generations, now reveled in appearing wild, unruly, shocking, vulgar, and aggressive. Many of their male counterparts, on the other hand, would adorn themselves with eyeliner and lipstick and other trappings of femininity, or androgyny. Cosmetics were now increasingly sold to male customers. Attempts were made to masculinize women's fashion and feminize the fashion and appearance of men. This was precisely what the goddess would do, as attested by an ancient hymn sung in her praise. She adorns a man as a woman, she adorns a woman as a man. A concept that had never before existed in human history was invented to coincide with the metamorphosis. It was called gender identity. By this, it was now possible to divorce oneself from one's own biological being. Everyone was now told that they possessed a gender or sexual identity that could very well be the opposite of what they were born as, contrary to their biological gender. All were now encouraged to consider whether they were in fact authentically other than what they were. Men were to consider whether they were in fact women, and women whether they were in reality men. Kingdom of Magic. The young were especially vulnerable, as it was their elders and teachers telling them that this was in fact the truth. The seeds were planted for boys to wonder if they were actually girls, and girls if they were boys. Dresses, they were told, were for boys as well as girls. Girls could be princes and boys could be princesses. Age-old fairy tales now had to be altered in order to ensure that princes no longer rescued the princesses, and that the princesses now possessed a sufficient number of masculine attributes. And if a boy or girl desired to see their favorite fairy tale characters at Disney World, he or she would find that boys and girls no longer existed. The two words had now become a profanity never to be publicly spoken by the keepers of the magic kingdom. They had been made to magically disappear. It was all magic, the magic of the goddess. Ishtar's Storybook Hour. And if little children were not already sufficiently confused as to their sexual identities, they could now be brought to the public library, where a man wearing lipstick, false eyelashes, mascara, high heels, a wig, and a dress formed to simulate women's anatomy would read to them their favorite children's storybooks. They had once ministered as priests in the temples of Ishtar. Now they ministered to children in public libraries. In an ancient Hittite prayer, Ishtar is described as possessing the power to make young women dress as men on their right side, to make young men dress as women on their left side. So the spirit of Ishtar now again made young women dress as men and young men dress as women, and both dress as both, and as neither. A strange spirit was now leading the culture in which adults now seemed to take great delight in encouraging children to take on the dress and attributes of the opposite gender. Return of the Gala Priest. After ages of absence from the mainstream of Western civilization, transvestites, or as they were now often called, drag queens, began emerging from the shadows and onto the center stage of mainstream culture. In the days of the goddess, they had basked in the limelight of ancient pagan temples as her gala priests. She had returned, so it was inevitable that they would return as well, as in their ancient glory days they were now again celebrated and enshrined in the limelight of mainstream culture. They had returned with the goddess to again officiate, minister, and preside as high priests of modern culture. And still, the goddess was not finished. There was another step, another realm to be entered, and another transformation to be set in motion. This one would converge on a specific site, at a specific time, a specific event. It would be there in the streets of New York City that the goddess would take her stand, and from there that she would cast a new spell and set in motion a new metamorphosis that would change American culture and that of the world. Chapter 31. Priests, Gods, and Shadows. It was the line that the goddess crossed at the end of the 1960s that would trigger a metamorphosis of morality, ethics, values, society, culture, perception, and a human nature of seismic proportions. The altering of desire. It was all there, implicit from the beginning and made clear over and over again in the ancient inscriptions. May Ishtar, mistress of battle and conflict, turn his masculinity into femininity. She was continually praised for her power to turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man. Implicit in the changing of sexuality is the changing of desire. A man transformed by the goddess into a woman would presumably now desire men. A woman changed into a man would presumably desire women. This brings us into the realm of altered desire. The goddess herself boasted of being able to change back and forth between female and male. Though unspoken, it would be implicit that her desire as a woman would be for a man and as a man for a woman. Beyond that, she was the one especially invoked when one was seeking to alter another's romantic or sexual desire. She was the sorceress. It was her power to change desire. Then there were her priests, her performers, the cultic ministers of her temples, the men who dressed in female garments and took on female appearance. They would serve as examples of her power to alter sexuality, but their transformation went beyond clothing or outward appearance. Some took on women's names, some would sing the cultic songs in the female dialect, some even took on roles akin to consorts or wives. Exile of the Asinu. Thus it was more than appearance or mannerisms, it was sexual. Ancient Akkadian texts give instructions to men on having sexual relations with the Asinu, Ishtar's feminized men. It was thus a feature of the goddess's worship for her male priests to perform sexual acts with other men. A large part of Ishtar's priesthood, getting cold. There we go. Would today be classified as homosexuals or gay, and her cult was one of androgyny, transvestitism, and cross-genderism. When Western civilization turned away from paganism and the gods and goddesses went into exile, the condoning of homosexuality and other related behaviors came to an end. When the goddess went into exile and her temples closed, the Asino priests and other cross-gendered cultic personnel left the temples and followed the goddess into exile. They disappeared. Nadine sucked in, God love her. You guys are cute. In the new era in civilization, gender-crossing practices such as homosexuality and transvestitism would be seen as immoral, sinful, inversions of the natural order. Such things would now be prescribed by codes of morality, societal convention, law, and scripture. The licentiousness and transgressions for which the goddess's sanctuaries were known would now fade into history, become distant memories, and then be forgotten. The emergence of the shadow men. But if the goddess was to return, what would we expect to happen? We would expect that the values and practices of her cult and worship would return as well. In other words, if the goddess whose religion involved the acceptance, the open practice, the sanctification, and the enshrinement of homosexuality was to return, then her return would again bring about the acceptance, the open practice, and the sanctification of homosexuality, and its re-enshrinement in Western civilization. And that is exactly what would happen. The goddess would cause homosexuality to come out of the shadows, out of the realm of the forbidden, and introduce it to a civilization to which it was alien and taboo. And when that would take place, it would not be so much a diverting of the sexual revolution, but its logical conclusion. The two priesthoods. The dynamic could be seen in the goddess's ancient cult of worship. Her female priests and workers, the Harimtu, and the Kesratu, and the Samatu, and the Istaru, engaged in sexual activity outside of marriage, but they did so with men. So sexuality was at first removed from the one context, that of marital covenant, but remained within the other, male-female sexuality. But with Ishtar's male priesthood, from the Asino to the Gala, the divorcing of sexuality from its natural or traditional context, its decontextualization, was taken to another level. The goddess's male priests removed sexuality from gender, from its biological context of male and female. Thus, they represented a deeper level of decontextualization. One priesthood led into the other, or one stage of decontextualization and deconstruction would lead into the next. Hello, Coffin. Um, the deconstruction of sex. In the same way, it was the sexual revolution that led to the normalization of homosexuality. If sexuality could be removed from the context of marriage, as in the sexual revolution, then it could also be removed from the context of gender, as in the normalization of homosexuality. It was for that reason that the seminal event that introduced homosexuality into the mainstream of Western civilization did not take place at the beginning of the sexual revolution in the early 1960s, but at the decade's end. And as with Ishtar's male priesthood, it would represent a further and deeper stage in the decontextualization and deconstruction of sexuality. It went hand in hand with another of the goddess's works. She had already begun separating husbands and wives and blurring the distinctions between male and female. If men and women were now interchangeable in every other realm, then it was only a matter of time before they would be seen as interchangeable in the realm of sexuality. So the emergence of homosexuality in American and Western culture was the fruit of several movements, all of which had a common denominator: the goddess. Seismic night. Hello, Holden McGroin. Happy to have you this morning. It would all come to a head in 1969 on a summer night on the streets of New York City in an explosion. It concerned a bar called the Stonewall Inn. It would lead into days of rage and violence and would trigger a new movement and a cultural transformation. It was there in the streets of New York City that the goddess would make her stand and bring what had been hidden in the shadows into the spotlight of American culture, then Western culture, and finally the world. Her agenda was ultimately to take a Christian civilization, alter its values, its perception of marriage, gender, and sexuality, until it had been transformed into a pagan civilization. As with the other transformations, it would have to be carried out step by step, first by mentioning the unmentionable, then by making the shocking familiar. From there, the culture would be moved to toleration, then acceptance. That which was once unmentionable would become established, celebrated, championed, and then enforced. As she had introduced the transformation on the streets of New York, she would then introduce it into media, film, theater, television, music, politics, law, the educational system, children's cartoons, cereal boxes, everywhere. It would continue its saturation until there was hardly a facet of modern culture that had not been touched or altered by it. Laws would be overturned, and what was formerly illegal would now be celebrated. The overturning of something so basic to civilization as the male-female paradigm and norm would prove especially potent in the transformation of American and Western culture. The other coming out. When the gods departed from Western civilization, the open practice of homosexuality went with them. Both disappeared into the shadows and fringes. Therefore, the reappearance of homosexuality onto the center stage of Western civilization, its reemergence from the shadows and closets that civilization after 2,000 years, was a sign. There were others who were also reemerging. There were likewise coming out of the shadows at the fringes of Western civilization after 2,000 years, the gods. Round 2. It would signify as well another change of colossal magnitude. With the disappearance of the gods and that of the open practice of homosexuality, it was a sign that Western civilization had turned to the gospel, to the Christian faith. Therefore, the return of homosexuality to the center of Western civilization was a sign not only of the return of the gods, but of a seismic change with regard to spirituality. It was a sign that Western civilization was turning away from the Christian faith. After nearly 2,000 years, the bond joining together that civilization and that faith was beginning to dissolve. Each major step taken toward the establishment of homosexuality would be matched by an inverse step toward the disestablishment of Christianity. Every movement to celebrate homosexuality would lead to an inverse movement away from Judeo-Christian faith or the attacking of biblical values. The embracing of the morality embodied by the goddess was both a measure of and an instrument for the dechristianization of American and Western civilizations. The goddess was now casting a deeper spell. She had altered desires and the perception of a nation. The civilization that had once stood for Christian values was now championing the very things it had once condemned and condemning the very things it had once championed. It was celebrating what it had once forbidden and forbidding what it had once celebrated. American and Western culture would be converted and would become pagan. And yet she was not finished. The mystery and the metamorphosis had to proceed to its next and even deeper stage. What would happen next had its origins in the goddess's ancient hymns, in the ministers of her cult, in her powers, and in a mysterious entity from her mythology. The Altered, Chapter 32. The next stage in the transforming of sexuality and gender would strike many as especially strange and alien, and yet its origins were ancient, and its mystery could be found in the temples of the goddess. The work of a sorceress. That the power of the goddess was to turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man, to change one into the other, implies even more than the clothing of transvestitism, the desires of homosexuality, or even identification with the opposite sex. In its most literal or ultimate understanding, it would mean the actual transformation of a man into a woman and a woman into a man. It would mean that the goddess had the power to physically transform a member of one sex into the other. It was again the act of magic, the work of a sorceress. To turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man was to transition one sex into another. It was an act of transsexualization or transgenderism. The person so transitioned by the goddess had become transsexual. Ninshubar. Ishtar's personal assistant was a deity named Ninshubar. Ninshubar was female, a goddess, but she was of a strange nature. She continually changed her genders. In the service of other gods, Ninshubar was male, but in the presence of Ishtar, she became female, and back and forth again. Thus, Ishtar's assistant was a transsexual being. It was Ishtar who would transform herself from female to male and back again. In this sense, Ishtar herself was transsexual, so it should be no surprise that transsexuality should appear in both her mythology and her worship. The intersex beings. In the myth of her descent to the underworld and her imprisonment there, two beings were created to enable her escape. One was called the Kurgara and the other the Galatur. They were described as intersex beings, not quite one or the other, or those who moved between the two. The names Kurgara and Galatur were also the titles of the gender-crossing cultic personnel that ministered in Ishtar's temples. In the Akkadian version of the myth, the being sent to rescue Ishtar from the underworld was called, Azushunamir, the Asinu. Again, it was an intersexual, transsexual, or transgender entity, and again, the name or appellation was also the title of Ishtar's cultic ministers, the Asinu. In fact, the meaning of the name Asinu is man-woman. An ancient description of the goddess's ministers says this: they turned out the Kurgaru and Asinu at Iana, whose manhood Ishtar changed to womanhood to strike awe into the people. The surgeon goddess. To transform manhood into womanhood, to strike awe into the people, would speak of something more substantial than effeminate behaviors in the wearing of women's garments. An ancient inscription from southern Turkey speaks of Ishtar's altering of sexuality in especially graphic terms. May Ishtar impress feminine parts into his male parts. The cult of the goddess is believed to have involved castration. Many of her priests and cultic personnel are believed to have been eunuchs, having been castrated as part of obtaining the position or having been castrated earlier in their lives. Some are believed to have castrated themselves. Later historical accounts describe the worshippers and cultic personnel of related deities as castrating themselves in the midst of worship. In one way or another, they were surgically altered. It was for them an attempt to rid themselves of the characteristics of the gender in which they were born and move one step closer to the gender they sought to emulate. Because of their castration, the amount of the male hormone testosterone that circulated in their bodies would be drastically reduced. This in turn would lead to the minimizing of other male characteristics. All this was combined with the wearing of women's garments and adornments. The goddess's priests and cultic ministers were the transsexuals of the ancient world. You couldn't find the Dan Bongino show? He doesn't start, well, I guess he starts at 11, doesn't he? A more extreme stage. So if the goddess was to return to the modern world, what would we expect to take place? We would expect the trappings and characteristics of her priesthood to likewise return. We would expect her powers to transform sexuality and gender to again be demonstrated. In short, we would expect the return of transsexuality or transgenderism, and this again is exactly what happened. Transsexuality and transgenderism represent a more extreme form or stage in the blurring and deconstruction of gender than that of transvestitism and homosexuality. Therefore, we would expect the return of transsexuality and transgenderism to mainstream culture to happen at a still later stage in the goddess's transformations. And so it did. The very first attempts at surgically altering an individual's sexuality were made in the early 20th century. By the 1960s, the procedure was still an extremely rare oddity. The terms transgenderism and transgenderal first appeared in the mid to late 60s. The term transgender is believed to have been officially coined in 1965. It was in the 1990s that the term first attained widespread usage. But it was in the 21st century that the phenomenon of transsexuality or transgenderism exploded onto the stage of world culture, centering again on the focal point of the goddess's return: America and Western culture. The vulnerable. Ishtar was most often portrayed as a young woman. When she spoke of her transitioning from one gender to another, she spoke of becoming an exuberant young man or a noble young man. The word young is of significance. If the gods are to alter a nation or transform a civilization, if they are to take control of its future, they must, as we have seen, possess its young. And so when it came to the confusing of gender and the breaking of its distinctions, it was the young who would be especially vulnerable. No generation had been so subjected to a barrage of gender blurring and confusion as that which came of age in the early part of the 21st century. And it was then that a massive change took place. The number of young people and children in America and the West identifying as transgender in America exploded. From 2009 to 2018, the number of girls seeking gender transition treatments in the UK alone skyrocketed by 4,515%. It was another phenomenon and unprecedented in human history. What was equally unprecedented was the fact that the greatest increases in those seeking or being referred to gender reassignment were now young women. A generation possessed by the goddess was now doing as the goddess boasted of having done. Young women were now seeking to become young men. Suffer the little children. The altering of children's bodies now became big business. Abortion facilities all over America added the transitioning of males into females and females into males to their services of killing unborn children. In this, they performed under one roof the rites of multiple gods. And since children were a captive audience as they sat in their classrooms, the spirit of the goddess came upon the public school system. School children were now being inducted into transgenderism through the words and authority of their teachers. They would be taught that they could decide if they were to be a boy or girl. They would then be questioned as to what sex they really were, and if they were not actually other than they had thought they were. They would then be led into the process of being transitioned. They were too young to understand the ramifications of what was happening. The process of reassigning their gender would begin, often while their parents were kept from knowing what was happening to their child. The altered. Children's entertainment, cartoons, video games, television, social media, movies, and other children's media and influences joined in the barrage. As a result, masses of children were subjected to hormonal treatments that would irreversibly alter and damage their bodies, their health, and their lives. Many of them were transitioned and sterilized for life before they even knew what sexuality was. Celebrities, government leaders, educators, business leaders, physicians, surgeons, and activists all joined the crusade to promote the altering of children. It defied rationality and common sense. What could have possessed them to embrace and champion such a thing that in any previous generation would have been viewed as madness? What possessed them was the spirit of the goddess. And so multitudes of children and youths were now being inducted into the metamorphosis undergone by the priests and ministers of the goddess in order to become her servants. But unlike in ancient times, the goddess was not interested in merely one class of people to serve as her priesthood. She was now after an entire generation. An entire generation was now being prepared to embody, in one form or another, the gender confusion of the goddess and to unwittingly serve as her priesthood. And it was not the goddess alone. The gods had always had a special interest in destroying children. If their sacrificial knives could not touch them before their births, they would touch them now. An idol of one's own being. If in a pagan universe one fashions one's own idol, builds one's own god, and thus creates one's own reality, then in such a universe one can create or recreate the reality of oneself. So as the work of the gods and the paganization of the West progressed, a woman could decide that her personal reality was that she was actually a man, or for that matter, an animal or any other being. But in order to put one's reality into effect, one must nullify the reality that actually exists. Thus, in order to create what is not reality, one must nullify what is reality. And to recreate oneself, one must nullify one's own existence. Self-creation thus becomes an act of self-destruction. And to create one's own reality is to make an idol. And to create it of oneself is to make an idol of one's own being. And in the act of transitioning, one must carve the idol so that it conforms to the reality one wants to create. And so the alteration of gender would always involve the act of self-destruction. The destruction of women. The destruction would go beyond that of individuals. It would affect society as a whole. Feminists began noticing a new phenomenon, the destruction or erasure of women. The word women was being struck from official documents and discourse, replaced with phrases such as people with uteruses, or not replaced at all. Men too were being erased. So too were sisters and brothers, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. The abolition of man. It was the mission of the gods to eradicate humanity, the abolition of man. They promised that one could do with one's being and life whatever one believed or imagined. But if one could give one's life and being to any purpose, it would mean that one's life and being had no real, intrinsic, absolute, or ultimate purpose. And if there's no absolute or ultimate purpose to one's life, then one's life has no ultimate meaning or value. And thus one's life becomes disposable. Man, woman, humanity, each person, each life. Thus, what the gods presented as freedom was actually destruction, and what they promised as fulfillment was, in the end, the abolition of man. Is it possible that one of the most pivotal movements of modern times was not only begun by the goddess, but indwelled at its birth by her presence? Is it possible that the event that triggered this movement not only was saturated with the elements of her mythology, but was its replaying? We are now about to remove the veil on an event that altered American and world culture. In its removal, we will see how an ancient Mesopotamian deity indwelled the streets of New York City. Part 8, Explosion. Chapter 33, Night of the Goddess. My stomach's growling. The return of the goddess could be discerned from the beginning of the sexual revolution. But what we are about to see is how a single event would embody her entrance into modern culture in a way no other event ever had. More than any other, this one event would open the door for the altering of values in the realm of sexuality, marriage, gender, family, even the Bible, Christianity, and the ways of God. Stonewall. It would be known as Stonewall. It would come to be commemorated every year in nearly every part of the globe. It would represent an explosion that would begin a leavening through American culture, Western culture, and then the world. Is it possible that this event was not only a conflagration of social unrest, disorder, and upheaval, but of spiritual forces? Is it possible that behind it all was the spirit of the goddess and her mythology? What is now known as Stonewall, or the Stonewall Riots, or the Stonewall Uprising, took its name from the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar of Greenwich Village in New York City. Is it Greenwich? Greenwich Village. As with other gay bars in the city, it was owned and operated by the mafia. In late June of 1969, the police raided it. Such raids were not uncommon for several reasons. Beyond the fact that homosexual acts were not illegal, the bar was operating illegally without a proper liquor license. The bar owners would typically bribe the police to allow them to function, and the police on their part would often alert the owners before carrying out a raid. Explosion. The raid began in the early hours of the night. There were an estimated 200 people at the bar that night. During the raid, the police cleared most of them out and focused their efforts on the bar's employees and a number of cross-dressers whom they pressed for identification. Soon they began loading some of those they had kept for questioning, into a police van. The multitude of patrons remained standing outside, along with curious onlookers. During one of the arrests, something took hold of the crowd. An agitation, then a spirit of rage, and then an explosion. The crowd started taunting the police officers and then hurling objects at them, bottles, rocks, and reportedly bricks. The rage was so fierce and the situation so dangerous that the police retreated into the bar, barricading themselves in fear of their lives. The crowd then came after them, charging the bar, attempting to break open its front door to get to them. Eventually help came for the barricaded police, but the rage and uprising went on. The Stonewall riots continued for days. At the time, it appeared as an oddity, a disturbance on the fringes of society. Most people had no idea it had even happened. But the repercussions of what happened that night would grow and deepen with the passing of each year. In time, those joining the commemorations of Stonewall and the movement it represented would number in the multiplied millions. Ancient doors and spirits. We have spoken of the door that had closed to the gods in ancient times. Stonewall was a key part of its reopening. In view of that, it should come as no surprise that it was an event of rage, upheaval, and violence. The ancient door was now being pummeled and forced to open. Spirits were entering in and gods were returning. And so, with regard to the realm of spirits and gods, what took place at Stonewall was of great significance, and it was not only the police and the multitudes who were there that night, but in the midst of the crowd was the goddess. What happened that night went beyond the natural realm. Those involved in it, no matter what side they were on, had no idea. They were only vessels or pawns in an ancient mystery. We are now going to pull back the veil on what took place on that June night in New York City. Behind that veil, we will discover another realm, a world of convergences, spirits, and flesh. The ancient world and the modern, the mythological and the real. Was there a reason that what happened that night had to take place in New York City? And is it possible that the reason goes back to the goddess and her mythology? Hi, Troy. I haven't seen you in forever. Chapter 34, The Wondrous Gate. The return of the goddess had ushered in the sexual revolution, but the revolution that was now about to begin would require its own entrance. The goddess would need a portal through which to enter and by which to bring back into Western civilization that which had been kept out. She would need to come to the gate. Ishtar at the gate. Ishtar had always been drawn to the gates. Among her most prominent symbols was a pair of standards referred to as gateposts. And one of the most famous of all archaeological remains is that of the Ishtar Gate that opened the way to the city of Babylon. So too gates played a central role in her descent to the underworld. She demanded their opening. She would open them one way or another. It was her nature. She was the trespasser of boundaries. What she was now about to force open was the long closed door, the locked gateway of Western civilization. She would have to come to the gateway to do it. In the late 20th century, America was the leading power of Western civilization and of what could still be called Christian civilization. She would come to its gateway. The goddess in New York City. America had one gateway above all others. It was the gateway through which millions entered and departed the nation, and through which trade, commerce, commodities, culture, and ideas poured in and out. It was the gate by which its most iconic statue lifted up its lamps, beside the golden door. The gate was, of course, New York City. So the goddess, who in ancient times was always drawn to the gate, would now, upon her return, come to the central gate of American and Western civilization, New York City. An offering of first fruits. One of the ancient inscriptions of her mythology tells of how she approached a wondrous gate. In the evening she came forth with authority and stood in the street before a wondrous gate. She made an offering of first fruits. So now again the goddess would come in the evening and stand in the street before America's wondrous gate, New York City. In the myth, she makes an offering of first fruits. First fruits refers to an offering or sacrifice that marks a beginning. So the goddess would now lift up her offering at the gate of America, the first fruits, the beginning of a movement that would transform American culture and the world. So there, at America's gateway, she would begin the opening of the ancient door. It would not open freely, but she was the goddess who boasted of the power to force open what had been closed to her. In the mythology of her descent to the underworld, she stands at the gate and calls out, "Gatekeeper, ho, open your gate that I may enter." She would not be kept out. So in the summer of 1969, the goddess came to the gate and to Stonewall. That night, her spirit would indwell the multitude, who would then demand that long closed doors be opened to them. That night, it would all begin, and the movement that would transform world culture would begin, as it had to, at the gate. What is the Eshdam, and could it have pinpointed the exact location in which the explosion had to take place? Chapter 35, The Eshdam. Ishtar dwelled in a place called the Ashdam. What was it? The tavern. Ashdam was the ancient Mesopotamian word for tavern, pub, or inn. The tavern was especially linked to the goddess. She was the protector of the Ashdam, the patroness of taverns. Of the goddess's special relationship to the tavern, one writer observed, "From this period and into the first millennium BCE, the tavern or alehouse was Inanna, Ishtar's special province, and one that she personally safeguarded." The ancient hymns that sing her praise make a point of noting the connection between the two. The goddess sits in the Ashdam and there makes her living. The connection between the two was so strong that the Ashdam could be seen as her home. One writer notes, "It may be that images of her home, as the tavern was sometimes called, automatically enlisted that aspect of Inanna, Ishtar, which specifically protected the local pub." The Stonewall Ashdam. The goddess not only dwelled in the tavern, but would use it for her purpose. So upon her return to the modern world, it was not only that she would enter by the gate, but that she would be sure to find an Ashdam, a tavern, to use for her purposes. And so it was no accident that on that evening in the last day of June 1969, the workings of the goddess would converge as they had in ancient times, on an Ashdam. In this case, the Ashdam was called Stonewall. Stonewall was the fulfillment of the ancient Mesopotamian word. It was a tavern, a bar, an alehouse. It was the natural setting for the goddess's dwellings and works. There was hardly another place on earth more fitting by which to make an entrance. It had to begin there. House of Ale. Ishtar's ancient Ashdams were known for one alcoholic beverage in particular, beer. The word can more specifically also be translated as beer house or ale house. The goddess dwelled in a house of beer. So Stonewall was especially known for one beverage above all others, beer. Visitors described it as being heavily saturated with the smell of beer. So as soon as one walked through its doors, one was met with the aroma of the Ashdam. Beer was also central in the sacred libations offered up to Ishtar and the gods. Fermenting vats were used in religious rituals, spells, and incantations. The liquid was believed to possess magical powers. The Ashdam or alehouse was believed to be a supernaturally charged space in possession of the goddess. So on that hot summer night of 1969, the Ashdam would again become supernaturally charged and possessed by the goddess. House of Altered Gender. Another element of the Ashdam was sexuality. The goddess confessed to using the Ashdam to procure sexual relationships. So at Stonewall, the element of sexuality was ever present. It was the issue of sexuality that distinguished Stonewall from most other bars in the city. And it was that issue of sexuality that ignited the explosion. The goddess connects her altering of gender to a particular place. When I sit in the alehouse, Ashdam, I am a woman, and I am an exuberant young man. Thus, in the presence of the goddess, the Ashdam became the place where the lines of gender were blurred and broken, and where the nature of sexuality was altered, where a woman became a man, and a man a woman. And so it was with Stonewall. It was the Ashdam where the lines of gender were blurred, crossed, and broken. It was the Ashdam in which sexuality was altered, and from which that altering would spread to the world. Judgment House. The Ashdam would play another role in Ishtar's mythology. The holy Inanna made her Ashdam. She stood in judgment, decreed their fate. The goddess is described as entering the Ashdam or alehouse to bring vengeance. The Ashdam thus becomes the goddess's ground on which to redress her grievances, punish offenses, and exact retribution. On the night the riot began, the Ashdam of Stonewall again became the site where offenses were punished, grievances redressed, and scores evened. That night, the multitude, inflamed by the spirit of the goddess, attempted to enter her Ashdam and stand in judgment against a civilization they believed had sinned against them. Go down to your alehouse. One Mesopotamian text says this of the goddess: Harlot, you go down to the alehouse. So in the summer of 1969, the goddess known as the harlot went down to the alehouse. Ishtar went down to Stonewall. Though it might come across as strange to Western ears, in ancient Mesopotamian texts, the word for tavern or alehouse is, at times, joined to the Mesopotamian word for holy. The goddess is spoken of as possessing the holy Eshtem, the sacred alehouse, the holy tavern. The tavern became something akin to her temple, hallowed ground, and so the bar known as Stonewall would become enshrined as a holy place. It was no accident that the movement that disseminated the ways of the goddess would hallow its sacred shrine, its temple, Stonewall, its sacred alehouse, the holy Eshtem. There was more to the goddess's dwelling place or Eshtem. One more element from her mythology was needed to complete it. It would be there at Stonewall, and it would play a central part in the explosion of that night. Chapter 38. We start 27. Oh, we've read a lot today. Ishtar was goddess and patroness of taverns and prostitutes. We would therefore expect the two to come together. The alehouse harlot. In one of the Mesopotamian myths that speak of her powers and possessions, the goddess is told, "You have brought with you the cultic prostitute. You have brought with you the holy tavern." She was in charge of the prostitute and the holy tavern. As goddess of the Harmitu, or prostitute, and of the Eshtem, or alehouse, Ishtar was the embodiment of both. She was the Eshtem Harmitu, the alehouse harlot, or tavern prostitute. In one of her hymns, the goddess says this: "When I sit by the gate of the tavern, I am a prostitute." Here, the three elements of the goddess converge: the gate, the tavern, or the alehouse, and the prostitute. The tavern, if not an official house of prostitution, was a house in which prostitutes dwelled and operated. The Stonewall prostitutes. So could the other elements of the goddess, that of the prostitute, also have manifested on the night of Stonewall? It did. Talk and rumors of prostitution had always surrounded the bar. There were reports of a prostitution ring being operated on the second floor. There were even reports of prostitution taking place within the bar itself. But beyond that was Stonewall's other and more visible link to prostitution. The tavern had become a center, a haven and gathering place for male prostitutes, sex workers, and street hustlers of lower Manhattan. The prostitution over which Ishtar presided in ancient times was not confined to female sex workers. The functions of the Asinu, Ishtar's feminized males, undoubtedly overlapped into the realm and functions of prostitution. A Sumerian inscription describing the goddess's festivals says this: "Tightening their hair grips for her, male prostitutes parade before her, holy Inanna Ishtar. Their locks of hair at the back are adorned for her with colored rags." The Harmitu Revolution. Not only were male prostitutes a central part of the Stonewall Inn, but they actually led the uprising. One of the most prominent leaders in that uprising and in the movement that followed was a drag performer named Marcia Johnson, who worked at night as a male prostitute. She was one among several others. So on that summer night at Stonewall, the two elements, the Harmitu and the Eshtem, the prostitute and the alehouse, converged just as they had converged in ancient times under the patronage of the goddess. That night, the goddess's modern-day Asinu, her male prostitutes, were there on the streets, gathered around her modern-day Eshtem to ignite the explosion. So the movement that would transform Western culture was started by prostitutes, just as it was begun by the prostitute goddess, the alehouse harlot. But why Stonewall? Why there as opposed to other taverns or alehouses? Was there something more to it? Is it possible that the answer lies in ancient tablets that pinpointed Stonewall as the place in which it had to happen? Let's see where we're at here. We'll go right there. Okay. Chapter 37, The Stone Wall. The goddess had always been known as the one who broke down barriers. She came to New York for that purpose, so there could not have been a more appropriate name for the place where she would break down that barrier than Stonewall. But could there be more to the mystery? The goddess on the wall. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains a vivid description of the goddess's rage. Ishtar attempts to seduce the hero Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, in a blunt and cutting discourse, spurns her advances. Ishtar retaliates by calling down the bull of heaven to wreak destruction on the earth. Gilgamesh and his associate Enkidu slay the bull. Ishtar then mounted the great wall of Uruk. The goddess takes her stand on top of the city wall and there gives vent to her anguish and anger and calls down curses on those who offended her. She, the goddess who vented her fury on the city wall, now, on the night that she would vent her fury on an entire civilization, chose as her focal point the place called Stonewall. There she took her stand and made it her platform, and from there she unleashed her anguish and fury. The Wall of Uruk. The ancient wall of Uruk on which the goddess stood was made up of bricks. On the night of Stonewall, bricks had a prominent place. The stone wall in itself was known for its facade, a wall of bricks. Beyond that, the Stonewall riots were begun with the hurling of objects at the police. No one knows exactly what those first objects were, but it was reported to have been bricks. Bricks became a key part of the Stonewall mythology. The question, who threw the first brick at Stonewall, became a rallying cry for the movement. It is known that brick-like stones were dug up from nearby tree pits and were among the objects hurled at the police officers at the beginning of the uprising. The Stone and the Stonewall. The immediate event that led Ishtar to stand on the wall and cast down her curses was Gilgamesh's slaying of the bull of heaven. But behind the slaying, the seminal offense that triggered all that followed was Gilgamesh's scathing rejection of the goddess's advances. As she stands on the wall, it is the first thing she speaks of. Woe unto Gilgamesh, who slandered me. How had Gilgamesh slandered the goddess? He presented a case against her. If he became her lover, it would bring him calamity and sorrow, as it had her past lovers, Tammuz and a long line of others. The goddess brought harm and destruction to those who loved her. She was toxic, unstable, and deadly. In his devastating attack on her history and nature, he used pictures, symbols. One of these is of particular note. The goddess, he said, is a stone that buckles out the stone wall. The other stone wall. Thousands of years before the uprising of Stonewall, the words stone wall were inscribed on clay tablets. The word Stonewall was used in connection with the goddess of sexuality, of taverns, prostitutes, of transvestitism, transsexuality, homosexuality, and the crossing of genders. Stonewall were the words and symbol used to speak of the goddess's destructive consequences on the world around her, and specifically on her own people, her lovers. Stonewall was used in the condemnation that caused her offense and ignited her fury. Now the word Stonewall would again be joined to the goddess. Again, it would be used to cause her offense and ignite her fury, and again it would become the symbol of her rage. The riots that erupted that night would leave Stonewall broken, burnt, and shattered. According to the ancient accusation in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the goddess would cause the stone wall to buckle. It was the most fitting of names and places, for at Stonewall, the goddess would cause another wall, a wall of ancient origins, the moral hedge that had served Western civilization for nearly 2,000 years, to likewise buckle and collapse. There was an ancient symbol linked to the goddess's power. It would accompany her when she entered into battle. It was the first sign of her coming. Therefore, when the goddess entered into battle at Stonewall, is it possible that she was accompanied by her ancient sign, and that it was the first sign of her coming there? Chapter 30, The Lion's Head. With the exception of the planet Venus, the star of Ishtar, no other image was so prominently associated with the goddess as was the lion. Labitu, the lioness. The goddess was called Labitu, the lioness. The title spoke of her power, her ferocity, and her savagery in battle. It appears in several ancient prayers and poems. Inanna, great light, lioness of heaven. My lady, lioness of battles, who challenges foreign lands. In heaven and on earth you roar like a lion and devastate the people. Like a fearsome lion you pacify the insubordinate and unsubmissive with your gall. On harnessed lions she cuts to pieces him who shows no respect. She who rides the lion. No other animal was so associated with the goddess. None other so graphically embodied her. It was the symbol of her divinity. It was the lion that carried her into battle. She is described as riding a chariot driven by 7 lions, and in carved reliefs she stands on the back of a lion or lions as she rides into war. Her power was so great that even the king of beasts yielded to her will and obeyed her commands. Thus the lion was her chosen platform from which she would wage war and inflict vengeance. The lion's head. But there was one part of the animal that most strongly displayed her power and dominance: the lion's head. The goddess is depicted in carved reliefs as holding reins by which she turns the lion's head and directs the course of her entrance. In other reliefs, she places her foot on top of the lion's head. It was a signal of total dominance and uncontested power. Ishtar was the goddess who stood on the lion's head. Then there was the tactical dimension. The lion's head was the first, most glaring, and most terrifying sight that an enemy would see as Ishtar approached to wreak destruction. The lion's head became, in and of itself, a symbol of her power. It was the lion's head that crowned her scepter. And when she rode into battle, she would often brandish a curved sword, a scimitar, crowned with the lion's head. The symbol would serve as a reminder to her adversaries of the ferocity of her destructive power. The other Eshtem. If the goddess was to enter into battle to engage in spiritual and cultural warfare, is it possible that the sign that accompanied her entrance into warfare in ancient times would manifest again? If Stonewall and Greenwich Village were to be the site where the war was to be launched, is it possible that the sign of her approach would specifically manifest there? The sign appeared, and it did so in the same setting as did Stonewall. In fact, on the same street. It appeared just 2 doors down from Stonewall's front entrance. Like Stonewall, it was a bar, an alehouse, an Eshtem, dwelling place of the goddess. It chose as its symbol and its name a part of an animal. It was called the lion's head, the same sign that in ancient times represented the power of the goddess as she entered into war. The sign of her approaching. As the lion's head would be the first sight of the goddess's approach in battle, so the Lion's Head Tavern appeared in Greenwich Village in 1966. It was the first sign of what was approaching. Later that same year, 3 members of the mafia purchased the property that would become Stonewall. The following year, 1967, Stonewall opened its door. So as in ancient times, the lion's head was the first sign that the goddess was coming. In ancient times, the lion's head had accompanied the goddess into war. It would again. Its appearance on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village was the first sign that a war was about to begin, and that it would be led by the goddess. Standing on the lion's head. After the Stonewall Uprising, one of the leading organizations of gay advocacy set up offices in Greenwich Village. Its headquarters were now located directly above the lion's head. It would now wage the goddess's war, just as the goddess had waged her wars in ancient times, stationed on top of the symbol of her power, the lion's head. To the goddess was the power to seize and possess human vessels. If she was the principality behind the uprising at Stonewall, if she was inciting it, then is it possible that on the night of the uprising, she exercised the power to seize and possess? Is it possible that those who played a key part in igniting the explosion were acting as her avatars? And is it possible that one of them even appeared in her image? This is the last chapter. Not of the book, just upcoming. We're getting close, actually, to the end. There's 52 chapters, I think. Is that right? 50. Hold on, I'll find it. There are, yes, 52 chapters, and we're on chapter 39. The avatars. The word avatar comes from a Sanskrit root word meaning descent. In Eastern religion, it speaks of the descent or manifestation of a deity in bodily form, an incarnation. We will use it here to speak of a human being who serves as a vessel for the incarnation of a god, as in a spirit, a host. Ishtar's avatars. The phenomenon, as we have seen, was common in ancient times and in pagan cultures, where the spirit of God possessed its worshippers. We saw it in the ancient priests and priestesses who served as messengers of the gods, and we saw that the goddess Ishtar was especially known for possessing human vessels. So could the goddess, upon her return, use and inhabit a human vessel? Could her spirit possess and animate that vessel to act as her proxy? Could there have been at Stonewall an avatar? Hi, Debbie. The warrior woman. If so, we would expect her to be like the goddess, female, and yet it would seem unlikely for a woman to play a central role in the Stonewall uprising, as the overwhelming majority, some would say as much as 90% of the bar's patrons, were male. But there was at Stonewall that night a human vessel, a host, an avatar of the goddess, and it was a woman. We might expect the avatar to have been, like the goddess, a female but with male attributes. And this is exactly what she was, a woman with male attributes. As Ishtar was a fighter, we might expect her avatar to be as well, and so she was. As Ishtar was fierce, so too was her avatar, and it was this one in the likeness of the goddess who would serve as the primary instrument to ignite the uprising. Arresting the goddess. In the myth of Ishtar's descent to the world of the dead, the goddess throws herself in a rage at Ereshkigal, goddess of the underworld. Ereshkigal responds by ordering her arrest and imprisonment. Ereshkigal opened her mouth and spoke to Namatar, her messenger. She addressed herself. Go, Namatar, imprison her in my place. Ishtar is apprehended and imprisoned in the place of Ereshkigal. So as the mystery replayed, the woman who acted as Ishtar's avatar was apprehended and arrested, and it was that apprehension and that arrest that would trigger the riot and the movement that would alter world culture. The igniter. It happened as the police were making arrest of the patrons inside the bar, then taking them outside to the police wagon as the crowd outside stood watching. They brought out the woman with masculine features, the avatar, in handcuffs. According to eyewitnesses, she was fierce, violently fighting with at least 4 of the police officers as she shouted, protested her treatment, and cursed at them. The fighting was said to have lasted for about 10 minutes. It was then that she shouted to the crowd the words that would spark the uprising and the movement. Why don't you guys do something? She was then heaved into the back of the police wagon. It was at that moment that everything changed, and it all began. The Avengers. In the myth of Ishtar's descent, it was the goddess's disappearance, her apprehension, and her imprisonment that led to the issuing of the appeal and call to release her. The call would be answered, depending on the version of the myth, by the Kurgara, the Galatur, or the Asinu. They were all intersexual beings, and their names were given to the goddess's priesthood, which included men dressed as women, men who had sexual relations with other men, male prostitutes, and feminized men. So on the night of Stonewall, it was the apprehending and arrest of the goddess's avatar, the raging woman, that would produce the call to action, and those who would answer that call and rise up in the angered frenzy that became the Stonewall riots would be intersexual or cross-gendered individuals. They would include males dressed as females, males who had sexual relations with other males, male prostitutes, feminized men, as were the priests of the goddess, the Kurgara, the Galatur, and the Asinu, each of whom bore the name of the beings that came to her rescue in her imprisonment. The cursed. The myth identifies another characteristic or people group. Upon Ishtar's return from the dead, the intersexual beings that came to her aid are cursed for doing so. The curse is invoked by Erish Kegel. It was this: the sewer of the city shall be your drink, the shadow of the wall shall be your station, the threshold shall be your habitation. The besotted and the thirsty shall strike your cheek. In other words, they would live in the city as impoverished and homeless. They would dwell in the shadow of the city wall. So the other segment or characteristic of those who took part in the uprising was the homeless. Oh, sorry. Turn that off. Hold on. There we go. They were the homeless male prostitutes who took refuge at Stonewall. They dwelled in the shadow of the wall, and they too would play a leading role in the beginning of the riots. They tear away the wife. In the myth of her return, the goddess is accompanied by demonic entities. They are described as having an agenda to separate man and woman, husband and wife, breaking apart marriage and family. They tear away the wife from a man's embrace. They snatch the son from a man's knee. They take the wife away from a man's embrace. So the goddess's most dramatic return to the world would be joined to the spirits that separated man from woman and woman from man, and that would work toward the deconstruction of marriage and the disintegration of family. The moment of frenzy. As the fighting woman was put into the police wagon, a spirit took hold of the crowd and turned it into an angry mob. The situation quickly turned dangerous, and the crowd, in the accounts of eyewitnesses, went berserk. Who was the avatar? Who was the woman who incited the crowd and sparked the movement and everything that would follow? There's only one serious contender, a woman identified by name by several eyewitnesses. Though her later recollections were not always consistent, she would confide in and acknowledge to others that she was indeed the one. She was definitely at Stonewall that night and definitely fought back against the police. Whether she was the woman or one of them, she became the face of that resistance, the one who, in the mythology of Stonewall, sparked the uprising. Protector of the alehouse. In the view of all of this, her profile is striking. Like the goddess, she had masculine attributes. She was a male impersonator. Like the goddess, she was a fierce fighter. The goddess was the patron of the Eshtem, the protector of the alehouse, so the woman believed to have sparked the Stonewall uprising would become known for serving as a protector of the alehouse. She would work as a bouncer for the lesbian bars of Greenwich Village. She would patrol the streets of the village as their guardian. Charging storm. Ishtar was the goddess of the storms. The storm exemplified her nature, unpredictable, fiery, violent, stormy. Her roar was like thunder, her destructiveness like lightning. Ancient Sumerian and Akkadian writings joining the goddess to the storm are numerous. You charge forward like a charging storm. You roar with the roaring storm. You continually thunder. When the goddess displayed her power or her anger or entered into war, she did so as a raging storm. She brought out magnificent battle and called up great storm. Covered in storm and flood, great lady Inanna, Ishtar, you destroy mighty lands with arrow and strength and overpower lands. You kept on attacking like an attacking storm. kept on blowing louder than the howling storm, kept on thundering louder. Loud thundering storm. The identification of the goddess with the storm is so strong that in an ancient Mesopotamian hymn, she is herself addressed as a storm. Loud thundering storm, proud queen of the earth gods, supreme among the heaven gods. Loud thundering storm, you make the heavens tremble and the earth quake. Great priestess, who can soothe your troubled heart? You flash like lightning over the highlands. You throw your firebrands across the earth. So the goddess was given the title Storm, and at Stonewall she would live up to it as she displayed her power, her anger and fury, and she entered into battle as a raging storm. So what was the name of the one who served as her avatar that night? The name of the one who became known for sparking the riots and the movement that came from Stonewall was unique. Her name was Storme, but the goddess and her avatar bore the same name, Storm. The storm unleashed. So the Stonewall Uprising and the movement that would trace itself to that uprising were ignited by a female with male attributes, a fighter, a protector of alehouses, a fierce, angry, raging leader of those who crossed the boundaries of gender, the inciter of a multitude of feminized men, a mysterious figure known as Storme. Was it the goddess or was it her avatar? That night it made no difference, it was both. They acted as one. Ishtar had returned. The same spirit that took hold of the multitude at Stonewall would, in time, take hold of millions. It all began that night when she set in motion a disturbance and a movement that would transform world culture. She would unleash a storm. In the midst of the fury and violence of the uprising, a strange thing happened. To an objective observer, it would make no sense, but it too was part of the ancient mystery. It was the dance of the goddess. That's where we're going to stop. Shoot, we'll probably finish this next week. It's been good. What do you guys think? Are you enjoying the book? I really like this tank top is giving me grief here. Sorry. Trying not to be indecent. It's just hot down here. I like his writing style. He's a little repetitive. I think he could, that's my only real critique I would give. The only other thing I would say was it would be nice to have like parentheses with a pronunciation after it. But that's laziness in reading on my part. I should read ahead more and look those words up so I know how to pronounce them. But I really am enjoying his storytelling. I wondered if his weaving back and forth between the ancient times and what's currently happening would be distracting or jarring for people listening to it being read, or is that transition happening seamlessly? I wonder. Do you, as we go back and forth, do you struggle to realize we're in the past or that we're in the present, or do you feel like it's pretty clear? For me, it's, I guess, because I can actually see the words. It's clear. I'm one of those people that is an auditory learner, but that is really amplified for me by being able to read along and listen. So for those of you who are auditory learners like me and who like to have that visual input at the same time, I would encourage you to read along because it cements it in your brain. I'm always very cognizant that there are so many learning styles. I think people kind of dismiss that once they get out of school. But the fact is we're lifelong learners. And so I always try to appeal to, all of the senses I can appeal to in a podcast, because, that way it sticks with you. What's the point of doing this if it doesn't stick with you, right? I'm just continuously, one of those, constantly, I'm constantly amazed at how he is able to look at that ancient mythology and idol worship and false gods and dig into that in such a way that he can apply it to what's going on today and make that so clear to us. It's he's just an incredible storyteller in that way. And it's really, for me, it's made things make so much more sense. I'm much less confused and blindsided now because I understand what's going on. I truly, I always have said we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. Um, and now I understand what that actually means. Like before, it was just kind of these vague forces fighting, in the sky. But now to me, there's a biblical foundation to it. There are correlations. We can look back historically and see ourselves repeating things that we don't know because we don't know the history. And I think Johnathan Cahn really opens that up and does it in a beautiful way for Christians and Jews and for just the average person who's, maybe non-religious, maybe believes in God, but isn't a church going person. I think he makes it so clear. So I really feel like he's so strong in his writing. Debbie says, I think he's writing and speaking prophetically in a biblically repetitive, poetic style. I agree. Like the books of the Old Testament. That's kind of the challenge in reading it, is to read it, with that intended passion and that ebb and flow of the language. I used to do, I did a lot of drama in high school and college and acted and wrote one act plays and directed and all kinds of stuff. And I always did the dramatic reading stuff. I really liked that. And I would take things that people wouldn't think of for dramatic reading. So, like I would take Dr. Seuss's books and do dramatic readings of them because there's great wisdom. The book, Horton Hears a Who. I used to read that at my after school program, and then I would do a discussion with our older kids that were junior staff, um, about a person being a person, no matter how small. And there's just brilliance in that kind of writing for children. I love children's literature. Um, Lorraine says it's so eye-opening. It defines what I have been witnessing for my whole life. The enemy of our soul's plan. Oh, well said. The enemy of our soul's plan. I love that. Hi, Lorraine. Love to hear you read. Love his writing style, following the timeline. Good, good, good. I'm trying to be clear in that, and give pauses so we're going back and coming forward. There's an art to it for sure. List 90 says, the eighth child. Welcome. I don't think I've seen you in here before. Maybe you've been lurking. Let me pop that off the screen there. Says, well done, both author and reader. Thank you. I'm working on it. I'm trying to become a better storyteller and reader. And since I write, this is such good brain work for me. I'm getting back into finishing my book. My goal is to have it done by December 15th. So it's so scary to say that out loud. Oh, thank you, Nadine. List 90 says, I agree. The scripture about our war is not against flesh and blood, is constantly popping up in my head. And it's like we're seeing the metaphysical manifest here in this earth. Like we can actually see it. Yes. Yes. I mean, as I'm reading it, it's so hard for me not to say, oh my gosh, that's happening now. This story is that, and look how it correlates. And it's hard for me, to kind of rein in the enthusiasm because it's just so exciting to me to now understand why this is happening and to not feel so scared and thrown off by it. I saw it, Liz. I saw it. It only allows you so many words. Debbie says the poetic repetition drives home the importance of his points and helps the reader to recall the substance. That's a really good point about style. I like that style. I like that poetic style in some of the writings I've shared with you guys. I love that cadence of that poetic style because it just it lends itself to the rhythm. Like we remember music so well and we remember lyrics, and to me you can capture that in writing, and you can make your writing kind of lyrical, and it's more impactful. So that's something I always work to in the message that God gave me in my near death experience. It's very lyrical. I am author, the maker, the flower, the wind, the sinew, the marrow. Um, it is very, it's very musical in that way, and I do like that. I would have loved to hear you read Dr. Seuss. I will do that. I will get a Dr. Seuss. I like a person in um, Horton Hears a Who the best. It's one of my favorites of his. Hold on, I'm looking for something here. My brother's ringing my phone off the hook. Um, and I would call him, but you know how I call Don sometimes during a show, but I never know what my brother might say. So he doesn't have an appropriate filter. God love him. Um, Hold on one second. I'm looking for something in particular here. That's not it. Doc on it. This one. Oh, this was an email that somebody sent me, and I wanted to read this to you guys. Mnemonics, yes, for sure. Um, Love it. Michael Hunt says it explains a lot of what's going on now. Ishtar is a demon. Yeah, she's one of the little g gods. Um, I have to tell you, Penny, when I join in your live shows, I feel like I found my people, those on the path I'm on, so I don't feel so alone. That is so much what I'm about, is creating a community for us here. This isn't my podcast. This is a place where we all come to hang out. If we all lived in the same city, we would all be getting together at a coffee shop and that's the feel that I'm going for. I want you guys to know that this is so much about you. Um, and I want it to be less and less about me and more about you and more about God and what's going on in the world. I'm trying to get out of the way of God, um, and just to try being um, just that vessel, that God can move through, and I'm trying not to inhibit it in any way. I vote for Dr. Seuss readings. I will absolutely do that. Maybe we'll take a break from the heavy stuff and do some children's literature. My mom bought me The Giving Tree. It's my favorite Shel Silverstein book, and she bought it for me in hardback. It's a collector's, and it just out of the blue. And it's so funny because she's struggling with her memory, but she remembered that was my favorite book, or that is my favorite book, and so she bought it for me. And I thought, I'm going to read this to them because it's such a beautiful, beautiful book. But I can never get through it without tearing up. It is so profound. If you've never read it, it's great. I'll definitely read that next week, maybe, or maybe as soon as we finish this, we'll do some good children's literature. I have a children's book that I wrote that I've got to work on a little bit. I don't know if I've got it in here. Let's look. Um, uh, I don't know if I've got it in here. I'll have to look and see where that is. And I don't know if you guys do any writing. Do any of you do any writing, or are you big readers? And if you are big readers, what do you like to read? Is it like, what genres do you like to read? Are you into this kind of faith, religious kind of reading, or does that feel kind of heavy to you and you're more reading for escape? I know a lot of people. Um, my dad is one who just loves like political mystery kind of intrigue. Um, Stuff. I have a really hard time keeping characters straight since all of the comas and respiratory failures. I actually have to make a list if I'm reading a book with characters and write down their names and who they are. Otherwise, I get it so confused. It's really weird that my brain doesn't work properly that way anymore. Um, Hold on a second. I'm looking for this. Oh, wait, I know where it's at. Um, this is going to drive me crazy. That one. Here we go. Okay. This is called Can God Hear Me? Nadine loves reading true life stories, memoirs. Yeah, I like memoirs too. The book I'm working on is a memoir. I've read recently books of people who have. Oh, well, she'll have to finish that comment on the next one. Vote for Dr. Seuss reading. Okay, so this one's called Can God Hear Me? When I was little, each night before bed, and I can't remember when I wrote this. Actually, I wrote this when my cousin Frank was still alive, and he was going to illustrate it for me. He was a wonderful artist, and it sits today because Frank died, and that just is hard for me. Liz says, a big reader and writer. I love learning in general, but mostly scripture and faith-based books of all kinds. Nice, nice. Okay, can God hear me? When I was little, each night before bed, I'd say all my prayers as I bowed my head. But where was my God? I did not know. Was he somewhere above as I knelt down below? Was he up in the sky or in far outer space? How could he hear from such a faraway place? Should I shout my prayers loudly, ensuring he'd hear? Or maybe a megaphone could bring prayers to his ears? If I climbed to the ceiling on a ladder so tall, would my prayers finally reach to the Lord of us all? Maybe write it on paper tied to a balloon, then I could float it up, up past the sky and the moon. I could build a fine rocket with an engine so big, but how would I build it? With tin cans and twigs? What good was my prayer with him far and me near? Why bother at all if he's too far to hear? I asked my dog Clint, Clint, what should I do? He wagged and said nothing as he chewed on my shoe. My dad was at work and mom couldn't be found. How would I ever get my prayers off the ground? I feared my cause lost and got to my feet. If God couldn't hear me, why bother to speak? My face was downcast, my heart felt so blue, so I went to the garden, knowing not what to do. But there was my Gram on her hands and bent knees, tending so sweetly to our plants and our trees. I decided to ask her, perhaps she'd know the way to help my prayers reach up to heaven that day. Gram, can you help me? Can you tell me how to make my prayers heard by our Father right now? He's so far away and busy with much. How can I pray to a God I can't touch? And as I had hoped in my wee little heart, my Gram knew the answer. Man, that woman was smart. Our God isn't stopped by time, distance, or space. He hears our prayers clearly, knows our names and each face. He seems far away, yes, this is true, but he couldn't be closer to me and to you. He lives in your heart. Yes, he lives right inside. The God of us all has no reason to hide. He hears every prayer, sees each deed, knows each thought. He's wise and he helps when in trouble we're caught. My Gram had the answer. She'd made it so clear God wasn't far. No, in fact, he was near. I sat in the garden, Gram's hand in mine, and repeated my prayer to our God, the divine. He heard and he helped me, just like Gram said. Now I talk to him daily, every night before bed. God is our Father, and he's your closest friend. He hears and he helps you, for his love knows no end. Anyway, just pretty little sweet children's poetry. I hope you enjoyed that. The eighth child says, I only read nonfiction. I like the heavy stuff. Maybe The Committee of 300 by Dr. John Coleman. Oh, wow. Um, Debbie Johnson, I read and write poetry. Yes, I know you do. I write poetry mostly these days in Japanese genres such as haiku, tanka, and haibun. I enjoy reading many kinds of writing and study. Children's books, too. Interesting. I've enjoyed the reading books of people who've had near-death experiences. Yeah, that's where I get a lot of folks from there. Thank you for sharing this beautiful story. Well, thank you for listening, Kushal. This is beautiful. I still feel that is beautiful. I still feel that way with prayer sometimes. Me too. I think I love children's books that also speak to parents. So you've got the book, I'll Love You Forever. That is a book for parents as much as it is a book for children. Um, there's others. I mean, The Giving Tree, of course. So much of Shel Silverstein's work speaks to parents and to reminding us to let children be children, and um, to let them to let them be silly in their play, and to encourage it, to encourage imagination. That's why I love Shel Silverstein. Just wonderful. Yeah, Love You Forever. That's one I could never get through with my kids. Never get through it. I couldn't do it. I would cry every time. Um, there's another book. It's the Christmas story of the donkey. I can't remember the title of it, but I always struggle to get through that one too. So at Christmas time, we always had this routine. We didn't have a lot of money. I mean, there were Christmases that almost weren't, but for help of others. And one of the traditions that I did with my kids was on Christmas Eve, I always bought them each the same copy of a book, and a new pair of pajamas, and then I would read that book and put them to bed, and then I had put the books away for them to give to their kids when they grow up. So in the process of moving, I'd lost quite a few of them, but I still have some, so I'll be passing those on, and hopefully that's a tradition that will keep going, because that was something that was really special to me and the kids. Nadine says, that was beautiful. Brings me to tears. God is definitely revealing himself even more through you, my dear friend. Thank you. I honestly feel the presence of God when we're all together. Absolutely. I mean, God is faithful in that. He tells us, wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there I am also. And so I always feel like our time together and our prayers um, are just resonating through the heavens because of that promise of God. Sore Pet says, this brought tears to my eyes, reminded me of my own grandma. She had such a deep and pure belief in God. Her prayers led me to him, I'm sure. Thank you for this moment and also for reading this book. You're welcome. I'm going to get with if you guys know anybody who does illustration, the only thing is I'm not a rich girl. Um, we do well to get by. We're hoping that Don can retire before he's 90. But I mean, I don't draw, and I really want that book illustrated in the style of, kind of cherub-like children with the round pink cheeks and, the little fat bodies and, like toddlers look. I want it in that style, um, with I probably more of a watercolor look. And I don't know, I can do some AI and probably get some mock-ups of what I like, and maybe I can show those to you guys, and you might be able to direct me to somebody who'd be interested in such a project. I know my friend John has somebody who illustrates, so I'll reach out to him too. But that's just a simple little book that I think, you know, I think that one's ready to go. I really like that with some illustration. It would be wonderful. Um, all right, guys, it is 12:44. We go so long. I'm going to pray us out because I've got some things to do, and because my brother keeps calling and I want to make sure he's okay. It's not unlike him to call 20 times, but just in case this time it's something important, I don't want to not answer. Usually usually someone more official will call if there's trouble, but John's perception of trouble is different. All right, guys. So thank you for coming. I'm going to pray us out. We will be back Friday night at 8:30 Eastern to do the Nurse Penny show. And then we'll be here. We'll probably finish this book next week, it looks like. And I'm super excited about that. That it'll be our first completed book club. I just think that's so cool. And then we'll take a break. We're going on vacation the end of June. So I might just do some lighter stuff until then to work out the schedule with David, the 9/11 guy. He'll be coming on a Friday show, and then we're going to do the Harbinger 2 by Johnathan Cahn. And I think those two things will meld together really well. And I don't want to get too much into the conspiracy stuff of 9/11, though I think there's merit to it, because I'm trying to keep this kind of on a spiritual path. but that's something that can go over into the Friday night realm, because everybody was really interested in that Friday night. We got into talking about some of the strangeness, the things that happened in at the Mandalay Bay shooting and that sort of thing. But stuff I don't want to, drip down to the book club for sure. But anyway, let me pray us out. And, you guys, if all of my contact information is in the description. Thank you to the people who donated this week. I really appreciate it. You guys actually donated enough that it covered the live streaming. You've got to pay to live stream on Rumble. It covered that, and it covered StreamYard. And so for the month. So I just wanted to thank you guys for that, because that's now a bill that you guys are helping pay that I don't have to carry by myself. So your donations mean the world to me, and all of that information, if you want to donate, is in the descriptions area. All right, guys, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day, and for everybody that has come to watch and listen, and for everybody who will watch and listen on the replay. I just pray that you would help them open themselves to you, to the Spirit of God, to the Holy Spirit, and that you would move through each of us in such a powerful way that we would be saturated with your presence. Father, you know the concerns of our hearts, and you know the troubles that we're facing. And I pray that in the midst of those, you would bring your peace into our spirit, so that we can make decisions and we can speak things out of the love of your word and out of your love for us, so that we're able to bring to closure things that need to have closure, and that we're able to bring resolution to things that need resolution. Father, I pray that through your love and through your Holy Spirit, you would help us to love people who have not been lovable to us, that you would help us to forgive people that we're having trouble forgiving. And Father, most of all, I pray that you would forgive us. You call us to be the city on the hill, to be the light and the salt of the earth. And Father, we have gotten so disheartened that that it's easy for us to give up on being those things. And without your light, without us representing you here on earth, then the whole world stumbles in darkness, and we don't want to be the cause of that. And I just pray that you would make us loving and bold, and that you would make us gentle and strong. You're the God that can bring balance, and I pray that you would bring balance and that you would help guide us. Father, for those in this community who have reached out to me for prayers on issues, I just silently bring those before you without giving away any details publicly. You know what the concerns are, Father. Where there's fear, just bring calm and assurance. Where there's uncertainty, bring people to help bolster that person and raise them up and pray for them and support them in a way that they know that they're not alone. Father, where there's illness and injury, I pray that you would bring healing. Where there's strife, I pray that you would bring peace and love. And Father, most of all, I pray that you would forgive us for the ways that we have fallen short, for the ways that we have intentionally worked against you. We apologize for that. We admit that we've done it, and we want to turn from that with your help and your forgiveness. And we just thank you for that forgiveness, because it's that forgiveness that frees us from the bondage of the things that we've done wrong, of the guilt and shame of those things, or even of the idea that we were somehow justified and we're tenaciously holding on to that justification. Father, remind us that those are shackles, and that we jail ourselves by holding on to those things, and help us let go of those justifications, soften our hearts, help us move forward knowing the love and the gentleness of Jesus, and help us forge a path that draws others to us because of that light and that love. Father, we just thank you again for this time together. We pray that you would bless everyone who prays for this show, everybody who watches this show, everyone who donates to this show. I pray that you would bless them tenfold, and that their cups would overflow with your blessing, because they've blessed me. And I just thank you for putting them in my path as my people, and giving me an opportunity to minister to them through you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, guys. I love you whole big bunches. I'll be back on Friday night. Um, and then as we're getting into June next week, I'll give some updates about the show, um, and some other things that are going to start happening probably towards the end of June and then into the rest of the summer. Some other things I'm going to be involved in. Um, and like I said, give you an update kind of on schedule things as I think there's only going to be one or two Friday nights that'll be moved because we're going to go camping or something like that. But I wanted to let you know ahead of time so you kind of know, what's going on and you don't feel blindsided by the show not being on. If you have any prayer requests or concerns, or you just need to reach out for something, my email address is in the description. My website's in the description. If you go to my website, um, it will there's a link that you can subscribe to my Substack, and you'll get notifications ahead of time for book club and for the Friday night show. And I'm talking to a friend of mine about we're kind of playing with the idea of maybe releasing the chapters of the book that I'm writing one at a time on Substack and seeing how it does, or maybe even doing an e-version of the book that people could order, and then I'll email it out to them prior to, you know, going a self-publishing physical book route. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. And it was something that I had never thought of, and apparently not something that is all that uncommon today. So let me know your thoughts on that. I know for me, I want a physical book. I want to hold a physical book, but that might be some way, or might be a way to have some income to do that. So just be keeping that in mind and praying on that for me, and I'll be praying for you. We will see you guys Friday night at 8:30, and if I don't see you then, I will see you back here at book club Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. Central. We'll see you soon. Nurse Penny out.